Welcome to Cinemophile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemophilepod.com. On a summer vacation at her grandparents' in her house in Mallorca, teenager Cata spends her days playing tricks on her little sister Eva, annoying her grandmother and conspiring with her grandfather and flirting with boys. This lazy holiday routine comes to a halt one night when she discovers her grandma's dead body. The girl's mom arrives to help, but the role of caretaker she assumes is unwelcome. There's a lot in what I just said. The film is called Forastera, and we're joined today by the writer as well as the director, Lucia Aleñar Iglesias. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
A beguiling film in ways, and also a very, I won't say frightening is too strong a word, but certainly unsettling story in the way it's told. I know this started out many years ago as a short film. I'm curious about the evolution of the story. In addition to kind of fleshing out the characters, how much changed in this story and maybe even in the tone of the story between the short film and what we see today?
Like quite a bit changed. I knew I always wanted to make a feature length film out of this because I knew there was a lot more to explore in these themes of projections and somebody projecting the deceased onto you or whatnot, and the idea of sort of grief opening us up to eerie ways of keeping our loved ones alive. But I also knew I didn't want to make the same thing twice, right? So it was quite a challenge, but we worked on building a character that was more empowered in this feature length version, that she does get compared to her grandmother, but it's really her curiosity that leads her down this path, and her sort of search for identity that kind of leads her down this path. And also I wanted to really broaden the scope of the film, right? Bring in the family that she's surrounded by and grieving with, and especially sort of creating the character of the grandfather in the short film. It's a bit ambiguous as to whether or not he's aware of what's going on. And in this go around, in this feature version, I really wanted him to have an active role and to be aware of what he's doing and the decision that he's making of playing this game with his granddaughter, and also bringing in the character of the mother, who doesn't really have any presence in the short, right? And how she deals with coming back home and all of the emotions that come with returning to a place that might bring good memories and not so good memories. Aside from the story elements, we also worked on creating a different visual language for the film, where the island, this version of Mallorca, is still very much nostalgic and Mediterranean, but it's quite a bit more of a bubble than I feel like the short is.
You brought back the same actress to play the
I
part.
did.
And so, in terms of what you were creating with her character from the short to the feature, in addition to kind of giving her, she has a boyfriend or a budding relationship with a young man. What, what were the things that you were looking for? Was there a certain level of maturity that you were looking for? What were you looking for in an expanded, essentially, version of the actress that you were using from the first film?
I think the role of Cata is quite challenging in that she's quite a chameleon, and like many teenagers, sort of code switches depending on who she's with. And at the same time, she's having access to this like very ghostly side of herself, right? Where she also isn't a character that is extremely open, or she's at times quite opaque. And so I knew Zoe could deliver something like this. She is so magnetic and incredibly generous with her craft, but also gives the camera just enough that like really hooks you without over delivering or over explaining. And I really wanted to play in that subtle ambiguity where you're along, you want to go on this ride with her, but you're not quite sure where she's going to go, right?
Well, in addition to the fact that she's a very attractive young woman, you can't take your eyes off her. There's something in her way her expressive features, her eyes are just absolutely riveting to
Mm,
she really kind of pulls that off exceedingly well. And as you said, it's the small details and the way that she reacts to people around her or conversations or these apparitions and or unexplainable events that are happening around her. And she was incredible. And also, it really took advantage of her in the sense of there's a lot of close-ups. You really lean into us being pulled right into her character, by her expressions and there's other things that I want to explore with you in terms of her performance and her character, but she's just terrific. Zoe Stein, do I have that correct? Am I
Zoe
saying?
Stein, yeah,
Yeah,
she's
absolutely.
it. She's so good and has such a handle on her on delivering emotion and like can be really playful in that way. And I think it was very nice to have her going into this very daunting process of making a first feature, being very nervous in many ways, right? But knowing that I had an incredible actress as the lead role who I'd already worked with before. So there was already this common language we were speaking. And that was really wonderful, on top of her being just incredible.
Yes, she is. And I have to say that over the course of the story unfolding, the arc of her character, there are things in certain scenes where I had to kind of do like, did I just see what I thought I saw? Did I see something that indicates something that is really kind of going into a very difficult, I don't know how to say this without giving anything away, but there is and correct me if I'm wrong, and I won't use it if you don't think so, but there is a coquettish aspect. There's a bit of a sexual tension in her performance. It feels like as she's sort of becoming her grandmother's, there's something about that transition. I was never quite sure what I was seeing was what I thought I was seeing. I don't know if that makes any sense, what I just said, but am I?
I think what was important to me in her transformation,
Yeah,
in becoming, in playing pretend, right, was that
yeah,
she was she's playing a version of who she thinks her grandmother was,
yes,
right? Because
yes.
she never quite knew her in that way, right? But through this grief and wanting to explore her emotions that she has no words to really explain them, she turns to this sort of game of playing pretend, of trying to figure out who she was, and it also more importantly who Cata is, right? Through this game. And I think it starts with these objects of hers and this sort of more feminine side, right? Than what the character of Cata, the teenager, is.
Well, putting on
But
her grandmother's dress was the
mhm,
first
mhm.
step in that direction.
Yeah, which is it's a very playful act, right? I think we all have done that as kids, tried on our parents' clothes or
Yeah,
shoes or whatever,
yeah.
and sort of enter our imagination in that way. I don't know if coquettish is the word I would describe for how she's behaving. I think there's an empowered nature to this transformation for her,
Okay,
where she suddenly feels like she has a purpose in this
okay.
house and in the way that time has stopped for her and for her grandfather. She feels like this is a way to keep things moving, to find purpose.
Having said that, having heard what you just said, there is still a tremendous amount of this this back and forth with not, and you've also introduced into the equation the fact that her mother has a troubled relationship with her father.
Yes, there's a lot of tension, I think, in this playing pretend, right? Because when you start a game but don't set any rules, things can get a little messy or confusing, right? And so I think there's tension there between the adults and the kids because there are no sort of ground rules set. And one of the things I was interested in exploring in the film is how complicated grief is in a familial context because there's no sort of instructions or manual, and and oftentimes it's kind of a taboo with the kids, right? Because you don't quite know, you can't tell them how to feel, and that creates a lot of tension and conflict, right, with everyone involved because everyone has their own process, and especially for the grandfather and the mother who are also having this sort of reunion, right, in this period of grieving.
There are so many dynamics, and that's the thing about Forastera is that each character brings a kind of a Rubik's cube of how they fit into into the bigger picture. And depending on who they're interacting with, it can change. The dynamics change, and you have the grief of losing a very important person in the family structure.
Yeah, in a way, I think it's very destabilizing, right? When someone who takes on such an important role in the family
Yeah.
suddenly is gone, and how do you restructure? How do you relate to one another when that person is gone, and how do you fill those gaps, right? I think the characters in this film are trying to find ways to fill in those gaps or to somehow keep her around for longer, right? And sometimes that means taking on more responsibility, and sometimes that means literally turning into her, playing that dress up game.
Just to remind our listeners, we're speaking with Lucia Aleñar Iglesias, and she is the director and writer of Forastera, this beautiful film that will be, is this the world premiere at Toronto? The world
It
premiere at the
is.
Toronto International Film Festival coming up on September 8th. So if you're in Toronto or you have access to the platform of the Toronto International Film Festival, I urge you to check out this film. It is remarkable. There's so many remarkable things about it. And on top of everything else, you have brought to the party a kind of extra, I'll call it spiritual, otherworldly dimension to the story, which is the thing that kept me guessing. It's the reason I mentioned to you before we got started what this film reminds me of. The Shining, for a couple of reasons. One is the quiet. The quiet in this film is disconcerting. It raises the level of tension at times in the film. Sometimes it doesn't, but a lot of times it does. And also the allusion to previous generations, previous events that are unknown to us, and the impact, and you mentioned it early in our conversation, the impact that our family history has on us. And it just adds this other part that is keeps you guessing. It really does keep you guessing as to what's going to happen.
I think of it as the ghostly elements,
Yes.
and I think we were very intentional in introducing the ghostly elements of the film in a more casual way. I think what I'll say is if you're going into this film expecting a ghost story and expecting to be shocked or spooked or startled in the ways that maybe movies of this genre might, this is definitely not that movie. You might not even see the ghost, and that unless you're, looking for it or wanting to see it. And that for me was the point here that
Yeah.
I wanted this ghost to be a necessary creation by our main character in order to process this grief. For me, it's these like sort of ghostly presence sort of elements are in the film in service to Kata's emotional journey to sort of accentuate it or to amplify it. But it's certainly not a ghost story in the
Yeah.
ways you might expect it to be.
Yeah, and I certainly, it is not The Shining. I just, as a point of reference, it just in terms of setting a mood and a beautiful, beautiful look to the film, beautiful camera work in this film.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's just again, and the other actors, we'll get into that in a second, but I did want to give some credit to your DP, Agnes Piquet.
Agnes Piquet. Yeah,
Piquet.
she's fantastic, and it was so much fun working together. We, yeah, we really carefully designed the sort of visual language along with our production designer and really every department in the film so that we could create these sort of images that feel like postcards because we're in this idyllic setting and in this beautiful beach setting, right? But that there is like an eeriness and a haunting feeling to them. And I was really interested in creating a world that was a little bit off kilter because it's not all that real, right? It's real in that we recognize and relate to the context where these characters are, but a lot of the details and the the visuals are in service of the character and her story. I wanted to find ways in which to express how she was feeling and showing this loneliness or this search for meaning and loss in other ways so that our main character didn't have to say it. So we played with a lot of wide angles and long takes that kind of allow you to wander through the scene, and that also played into how time is meaningless in when you're grieving, and time has a way of sort of stretching and feeling stalled in a way. And I also think there's a playful element to the visuals and the design of this world. I think we worked on creating this house with a very specific color palette that makes you think of your grandparents' home, but also is everything is almost too color coordinated, kind of helping that sort of eerie element that I was speaking about.
One other observation, and I think in a way you alluded to it. This is a very precise film. I felt
Mm,
like everything was where it was in terms of the telling of the story, kind of the progression of the story, but also where the characters were in the shots that we see of them. You know, the ocean is used very effectively. There's just a lot of it just felt very precise. And
mm.
just as you were discussing, it sounds like you spent a lot of time in service to that idea, making sure that that was how it at least that's how it came off to me. And I include the editing in this film. You mentioned longer shots, but they seem that was when they were supposed to be. You know, they were that was a logical point in the editing, and everything just keeps moving along, but not at a hurried pace. It's just a
Mm.
very it's a pace that fits the story. It fits the
Yeah,
characters and where they are in their story.
thank you.
Uh,
Yeah, we were very precise in that way, and also I think just trying to be intuitive, right, with what felt
yeah,
right to telling Kata's story and to accompanying this character.
I have this right. This is your first feature film.
Yes,
Wow. Well, my congratulations, because
thank you. Thank you
yeah,
so much.
this is really a beautiful piece of work. It really, truly is. Story-wise, the telling of. I love the performances all across the board. You mentioned the grandfather, Luis Homar. Tell me if I'm even close. Am I?
Luis Omar. Yeah,
Yes. Okay. Wonderful performance. Noria Prims, Noni Ardal, everyone who was in this just finds the right tone. You certainly were a big part of that, but just the interactions and everything. There's a lot to be admired in the telling the story. So my congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I feel really proud of this cast. I think it was so wonderful to work with all of these actors, and
Yeah.
they gave so much. And sort of took care of one another in a way. I think there's many things that are challenging about shooting on an island, but one benefit was that we became a family, right? And the cast really took care of one another in that way, and I think it shows in the film and how it feels like a real family.
Well, the film, as I said, premieres at the Toronto International Film Festival, one of the 4 or 5 most prestigious film festivals in the world. Monday, September 8th at the Scotia Bank 14 Theater. I'm so happy for you. I'm happy for being at the Toronto International Film Festival, and I'm sure that you're going to get a great reception to this film. So I'm looking forward to more. So I hope somewhere down the line, when you're directing Marvel comic movies or whatever hell you want, whatever you want to do, congratulations on this. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah. Lucia Aleñar Iglesias, director and screenwriter, scriptwriter on this wonderful film, Forastera. Thank you. You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.